Martin Truex Jr. attempts to win a second straight Cup race for the first time ever and sweep Richmond, a place where he's led over 860 laps over his last 6 races. Kyle Busch, meanwhile, on a 13-race winless streak, tries to defend his title in Richmond on Saturday night as a 3-1 heavy favorite. We'll take a look at both drivers and the rest of the field with the latest odds and our picks, as well as the updated playoff standings and more, on Prime Sports NASCAR for this Friday, the 20th of September, 2019, on the Prime Sports Radio Network. Brought to you by RaceReviewOnline.com, RotoWire.com, and Covers.com. Make sure to visit Covers Experts at experts.covers.com, and you can take 50% off any purchase by using the promo code PRIME50. That's PRIME50. All right, so CJ, we are just, 36 hours away, I guess, around that time frame from the race at Richmond on Saturday night. Last Saturday night race of the season.
32 hours and 41 minutes. That's a pretty good estimate. Yeah, looking at the clock right now. Yeah, last short race, last night race, I should say, of the season. So looking forward to it. Obviously, a short track at night, certainly in the playoffs, always makes it a lot more interesting. Hopefully, Richmond, we don't get another boring race like we've had in the past. Hopefully, it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, that's happened, no question. And Martin Truex Jr. has been a part of that for quite a while, which was why he was my first pick. Would he have been your first pick if you had it?
Yeah, I mean, he won. Obviously, it was his first short track win, so that was a pretty big feat for him. But it's not like he has been bad on these tracks at all. Like you said, he's led tons of laps. He's led over 100 laps in each of the last 4 here at Richmond, 4 of the last 5 here at Richmond, which is just absolutely incredible. But only 2 of those have been top 5s, and only the one earlier this year ended up being a win for him. So it's kind of remarkable that it took him that long to get the job done. And you kind of got to wonder if, the spigot's open now, if all that water is going to come rushing out, and he's just going to be on a big wave, and again at Richmond for his second, win of the season. Second straight win of the playoffs.
Yeah, and again, amazing that he's never won back-to-back races before in the Cup Series.
Yeah, another thing that's absolutely incredible for him. Yeah, considering how dominant he's been and how strong he's been.
Yeah, he's led 861 laps over his last 6 races at Richmond. That is pretty damn dominant, and that's the reason why all 3 of us would have taken Martin Truex Jr. first. We'll get into the rest of the field in just a minute because I wanted to congratulate you because Martin Truex Jr. came through for you. See what happens in our crazy playoff fantasy point system where the first points race of the playoffs and you quadrupled the points. So Martin Truex Jr. Gave you 400 points for the win, and you moved into second place, and you actually almost moved into first place. So that was
very
fast.
Close, yeah. Very, very tight up there, and it's going to change obviously as time goes on because the points are crazy.
Yeah.
So every one of us, I'm sure, throughout the next 9 races or so is probably going to end up with the win. So that's going to swing around quite a bit.
And speaking of 9, we have all won 9 races apiece. How about that?
There you go. That's amazing.
That's pretty balanced. That's parity. That's parity.
Yeah, it is.
All right. I got a kick out of listening to the guys again on, was it NASCAR America? I think that's what it's called. And they were talking about, when they try to be sarcastic about things that they know the fans aren't happy about, like how we don't like there isn't enough passing in the sport. And somebody commented about, I guess because there was a lot of passing with, I guess it was Kyle going from 3 laps down to almost a top 5. And so they use it as a time to ridicule the fans not happy with drivers incapable of passing in this sport anymore. And what I wish someone of reason could be on the set when they do that, because the fans aren't, at least I'm not, I don't think we are. We're not complaining about there's not enough passing from 3 laps down to the top 5. We're complaining there's not enough passing for the lead.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You got to have battles for the win. And if somebody's out there dominating, I don't care if, second falls back to 40th and 40th comes back up to somebody out there that's got a couple second lead and nobody can go out and touch him, then what's the point of moving 40th the second? Second place is just the first loser. So yeah, you want to see competition at the front. You've got to figure out a way to make the passes more prevalent, certainly up front, but easier to pass up front. All these gimmicks that we have with, even in Formula One, Formula One's got the same problem. They've got the DRS wing that flips open. They've got electronic stuff that they can do to give them a little bit more power to try to make these passes. But the aerodynamics, the tracks, the way these cars are set up, it's just really difficult when somebody nails a setup to get out there and truly challenging them. And that's part of racing too. It's one thing, you've probably heard it many times, it's one thing to catch the guy, it's another thing to pass him. And if you're driving effectively, it's going to be really hard to pass to begin with. But then when you add on top of that all the mechanical issues, the rules that we have now, the package, etc., with the aerodynamic sensitive cars again, we knew this was coming. Eric and I talked about it at the beginning of the season. So here's where we are. That's what you get.
All right. So taking a look, by the way, the one driver that we all thought would not make it out of the first round of 16 that is off to a good start is Alex Bowman. So
yes.
How surprised were you that he put himself in a pretty good position after Las Vegas?
Less surprised about him putting himself in a good position as I was about the guys that had trouble. So he certainly benefited from a number of issues that other guys had. I mean, Eric Jones, he's one that should handily go through, but obviously the mechanical issue early on took him down. So I'm less surprised about Alex Bowman kind of not putting a foot wrong, more so interested in why some of the top or better competitors, I should say, ended up having difficult nights. He took advantage of that, and some of that obviously is luck, and some of that's going to play through, and that's going to see a couple of guys through these rounds, and that's the way the setup is. And if Alex Bowman is not putting a foot wrong, everybody else is feeling the pressure and making mistakes, then absolutely he deserves to go through at that point. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out over the next two races, but not terribly surprised about where he's ending up.
Well, one of those drivers that you're surprised that failed to come out of that race in a good spot was your top sleeper, Kurt Busch. I think we were all surprised how things turned ugly for him to get that type of start. That can kill you in the playoffs. So how reasonable is it? What does Kurt have to do to make sure he gets through these next two races?
Got to not have problems. So he slipped obviously down to 14th in the standings. He's got to get a top 10, top 5. He's got to, at a minimum, have zero problems and hope that nobody else, or hope that other people around him do. He's 8 points behind Newman, and he's 14 points away from Eric Almirola, who's the 12th place position. So he's got a lot of work to do to pull his way up, and it's really disappointing considering how much he should have come away from that race with in his pocket. I mean, he qualified on pole, ran really well. It was a race also very little attrition. So you only had really 2 cautions outside of the stage.
Yeah, that was boring.
Stage breaks. Yeah. So him ending up crashing. That's a terrible hole to be in at the beginning. And he's got to come out. He's got to get a minimum 2 top 10s, preferably at least 1 top 5, and go from there. Hope that other people around him have trouble.
And taking a look at Kurt, as far as his Richmond resume, it's been okay. I mean, he's had a couple of wins. He's led over 900 laps. He was 11th in April. And when you take a look at the tracks that would be considered the most similar, being Bristol, Martinsville, Phoenix, he was second in one of his 2 Bristol races. So, and it's been a good year for Kurt, even though since his win, he hasn't put together. I don't think he's had a top 5 since his win, right?
I'm not sure. I'd have to actually look that up. I mean, but from a track perspective, he's had some good outings. He led 98 laps here in the spring race last year. He was 7th in Darlington, 9th at Bristol. I don't see a top 5 in the last 5, but he's one that can, if things go his way and he doesn't have a problem, that he's got the car behind him. There are no questions anymore about Earnhardt or about Ganassi Racing. I almost called it Earnhardt Ganassi Racing. How many years ago was that? But yeah, since his win, no top five, so he's got to be aiming for that top five position when he does have the opportunity, like he did at Las Vegas, especially in the playoffs, cannot be making any mistakes. And that's not just on track, that's also his pits. Crew chief can't be making the wrong calls on setups. Pit guys can't be putting their hands over the wall and getting penalties. Yep. This entire team has to pull together. Yeah. Absolutely, they got to be perfect every single time out now, and that's the hole they dug himself in with the crash.
Now, the three of us did not take Kyle Busch this week. I think part of it, in my mind, has to do with the fact that he is a heavy favorite, and he hasn't won in 13 races. Yes. That's a combination that at 3-1, it's just the odds are just too small. It doesn't mean that Kyle can't go out there and dominate and win. We know he can. But at 3-1 on a 13-race winless streak, there are a few other drivers that have come in here that are just as capable as Kyle. But Kyle has been he's been rock solid at this racetrack with 7 top 10s in his last 8, couple of runner-ups, couple of wins in that span, and he even led 101 laps in April.
Yeah, about the only thing differentiating him from Martin Truex at this track is really the number of laps led in the past couple of races. He's definitely been out front. He's led at least 30 laps in each of the last 4. He's led over 30 laps in 4 of the last 6. He's only had one finish outside of the top 10 here, or outside of the top 10. It was a 16th place. That was in 2017, but you got to go all the way back to the fall of 2014 to find the last time he didn't have a top 5 or a top 10 aside from that 16th place. Plus, you got the back-to-back wins, one of them coming from 32nd position last spring. So he's definitely got it going on at this track, but 3-1 in the streak that he's on, which just isn't good. He's frustrated. I think once he gets a breakthrough, he'll be fine, and he will get a breakthrough. It's just predicting when that's going to come. And 3-1, probably don't want to be rolling the dice on that.
Harvick is your choice at 6-1. Hamlin 6-1. Truex is 6-1. And Harvick has 8 top 5s in his last 10 races at Richmond, including 2 runner-ups. But in that span, he's only led 171 laps, which is on a short track, not all that great. And he has a 1 in that span, even though he's been on the pole the last 2 races at Richmond. He was 4th in April, led 30 laps. But he's definitely in the best groove that he's been in all season, so I could see why you would want to jump on him again.
It was primarily his current form. Just aside from the Bristol finish where he was 39th, since that win back in New Hampshire, he's been a top 10, top 5 machine pretty much every single week. So he's figured out what he needs to do. He's got the team functioning the way that he needs. They're making the right calls. He's competitive every time out. I think he had a chance to win Las Vegas, but Truex just happened to be too strong over long runs. I think they'll figure that out. Richmond's not a bad place for him at all. Plus, his odds are significantly better than Kyle Busch.
Double.
To go with that.
Yes. and that's why my second choice would have been Denny Hamlin. Hamlin has, he's been also red hot here, 6th or better in 7 of his last 8, including a win. He led 189 laps from the pole in that win in 2016. He was 5th in April. And he's also been solid at the short tracks this year. 5th at Martinsville, 5th at Bristol, winning Bristol. He's led over 1,600 laps here. And I don't care that Denny Hamlin was non-existent last week. That's just not a good racetrack for Denny Hamlin. It's always been a bad racetrack for Hamlin. So I think at 6-1, just like Harvick and Truex, it's just, to me, it's a crapshoot which one of these guys is going to win. But I think Hamlin's definitely, especially racing a Toyota for Joe Gibbs, he's got to be one of the favorites.
He absolutely is. And if I didn't have a chance to take Harvick and Truex was obviously already off the board, Hamlin would have been the guy that I went to. I mean, just this, he's been fantastic. So, I mean, that 5th place that you mentioned earlier in the spring, that's no small feat considering he started 30th. He drove all the way through the field to come up and grab a top 5, and that was a string of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the last 6 at this particular track. So Joe Gibbs has got it. They're the ones to beat this season. Denny Hamlin has been making the most of it all year, albeit much more quietly than his other teammates. Only over the last 7-8 weeks or so has he started to really come to the front and make a name or distinguish his name, I guess, from the other ones on his team. So there's nothing nothing wrong about where he placed last week. I think he'll be back very strong this week, and then certainly for the rest of the playoffs as well.
All right, what about Logano and Keselowski, the Penske team there? Logano was Eric's pick. And the difference between the two, you've got Logano, who was second in April. He's got 10 top 10s in his last 11 races at Richmond, 7 top 5s, 2 runner-ups and a win. And Keselowski, he's got 8 top 10s in his last 11 at Richmond with 4 top 5s, a runner-up and a win. The win was a dominating 383-lap performance in 2014. And he also won at Martinsville earlier this year. So if you had to choose between Logano and Keselowski, which way would you go?
Honestly, I would have gone with Logano. And the only reason why is there's little to choose between the difference from them. I mean, the stats that you rattled off there for Keselowski are very impressive. But specifically at Richmond over his career, he's just got a slightly worse finish average than Logano. Logano's average finish is 11.1 from 21 races, whereas Keselowski has been here 20 times and his average finish is 13.2. They've got about the same starting position average, so they qualify about the same over that time. Just Logano, for whatever reasons, got a little bit better edge, and that probably has to do with the fact that he's won twice here versus Keselowski just having that one dominating win.
Surprised that their teammate Ryan Blaney hasn't performed well here, because this is his worst track, and yet he does really well on the other short tracks. It's not a problem for him. I mean, it happens. Everybody, I guess, has a nemesis track. This happens to be it for Ryan Blaney.
Yeah, average finish of 26.7 out of 7. So contrast that, obviously, with the two teammates that we just talked about. His best finish here was 18th, and that was back in the fall race of 2017. He's only got 2 finishes inside the top 20, and they were just barely inside the top 20 here. He's never led a lap here at this track. Even though he started on the front row back in the spring of 2017, he ended up crashing out of that race. But that probably would have been a good chance for him to at least get out front here. Wasn't even able to do that. So, yeah, he's not one that you want to be considering. Probably not even for fantasy this week.
Okay, let's take a look at some of our sleeper picks. And since I had the first pick, I went with Chase Elliott at 16-1. He's got 3 top 10s in his last 4 at Richmond, 2 top 5s and a runner-up within those 4. And he was also runner-up at Martinsville earlier this year, 5th at Bristol this year. Kyle Larson was your choice at 14-1. He's got 4 top 10s in his last 6 at Richmond, including a runner-up and a 2017 win, which was his last win. Believe it or not, yes, hard to believe. So, yeah. And by the way, Eric went with Eric Jones, his namesake, one of the Gibbs drivers. Basically, that's the reason Eric decided to go with Jones, because Jones really hasn't had a great resume here either, but he is teammates with the rest of his Joe Gibbs group there. So what about those 3 top sleepers? Which way would you have gone with your first pick, Larson or Elliott?
I would have stayed with Larson. I think just based on, again, current momentum. So he did not start out the season well. We talked about that quite a bit, but man, has he come on strong recently. Yeah. He's 5th, 8th, 3rd, 6th, 2nd, throwaway Brickyard, and 8th again last week at Las Vegas. So he's figured out what he needs. This has been a good track for him. Obviously, he won back in 2017. That was the last time he won. He led 53 laps there. So just based on current momentum, that would be where I would have gone. Certainly those 3 would have all been in contention. Eric Jones, I see why Eric chose him. He is a Gibbs driver, and Gibbs has been very good. Jones certainly has the ability to pull himself forward. He finished 6th here back in the fall of 2017. But he's a driver that absolutely has to make something happen after last week's mechanical issue. But then, good choice also for you on Elliott. He's 3 top 10s here out of the last 4, I should say. The other one was the 15th place finish back in the spring. But don't discount that 15th place finish because he started 32nd. So he definitely came through the field. Had he started, 16th, 17th, you would think he probably would have had another top 10 here.
All right. And this is going to be one of those races because it is a boring racetrack. Part of the reason it's a boring racetrack is we are not usually going to get surprised. The sleepers, that's why when we all went with our sleepers, we went with like the 3 top sleepers on the board. Yeah. So Are there any other drivers that you think have a chance, whether to win or in fantasy, if you had to be strategic this particular week, which deep sleepers would you say, okay, maybe they could go top 5, top 10?
I don't know if he's a deep sleeper, but somebody probably that's a little bit overlooked, at least on the fantasy side, would be Ryan Newman. He's been pretty decent here. His average finish over 35 starts, which is a very long time at this track. He's only got the one win. But his average finish over 12.5. So that puts him right up there with Logano and Keselowski in terms of what he's been able to do. And if you look at the last 5 Richmond races, 7th, 3rd, you got to throw away the 37th, but then 15th and 9th. So he should be one that most fantasy rosters would be a good spot for him. I wouldn't be surprised if he walked away with another top 10 as well, because he's been on such a top 10 roll over the last, since the summer really started even. He's just been doing a great job with that team. Then, outside of there, it becomes really tough to call. I mean, you got to deep sleepers here.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't.
Who would you go with between Byron, Bowman, and Suarez?
That's a tough question. Probably Suarez, only because he's probably at this point auditioning for a job. So he missed the playoffs. He's got to make something happen.
He needs to win.
He does, and he has to make something happen here quickly. He's had a lot of chances. He's just got to get it done. And by the way, his worst finish here was 18th. So he hasn't started better than 11th at the track, and his worst finish is 18th. So most of the time, or the last 2 times, I should say, he's started outside the top 30, and those were 17th and 18th place finishes. So if he's able to get his qualifying, if he can get some good practice speed early in the weekend, he'd probably be the one of the bunch. If you're looking for consistency and you don't want to gamble, though, you probably want to end up going with somebody like Bowman, because I think that team, based on their performance last week, like we talked about, I think they're just intent on executing to their game plan and not making any mistakes and letting the chips fall where they may. If they have the opportunity, they're certainly going to go forward and race. We haven't really seen them have that opportunity recently, but that puts you in a top 10, top 12 kind of position, which is exactly what he needs to be able to continue to move forward and advance.
Austin Dillon has finished 6th his last 2 races at Richmond, which are his best 2 finishes. So we'll keep. And by the way, he's 100-1, just like Ryan Newman is 100-1. Here's another one. How about Di Benedetto at 300-1? Let's throw a buck on Di Benedetto again, and maybe he'll get lucky.
Yeah, he's never had a top 10 here. The reason I skipped over Austin Dillon is because number one, I forgot that his odds were that bad. But I wouldn't put him as a deep sleeper here. I mean, well, how is he that overlooked? He started 6th and finished 6th. And like you said, he was back-to-back 6th place finishes. He's got it recently at this track. He started 26th in this race last year before finishing 6th. Di Benedetto, we've seen what he's been able to do. He found a whole nother gear in his career this season. He's on his charge moving forward. 16th is his best finish. That was back in the spring last year at this track at Richmond. So you'd expect something more for him. Maybe he lost a little bit of the edge since he's now got a confirmed seat for next year, but I still don't think that's going to hurt him very much at all. I think Dillon and Di Benedetto certainly are 2 very good choices that should be in fantasy rosters. But yeah, with those odds, go ahead and throw $1 on them.
And by the way, Almirola has had a pretty good history at this track with 5 top 10s. And Clint Bowyer has 3 straight top 10s, including 3rd in April. Boyer's 20-1. Boyer's another one that I mean, he's got to have a top 5 this week, if not a win.
Yeah, he really needs a minimum of a top 5. The win would be better, obviously, for his confidence and momentum going forward. 3 top 10s in the last 3 Richmond races. Earlier this year, it was a 3rd place. Again, 2 guys I don't really consider deep long shots because they've been pretty good here. But when you look at them compared to their teammates, certainly they're not performing up to the level of Kevin Harvick or certainly the Penske guys, aside from Ryan Blaney. Looking at Almirola, a 5th here in the fall race last year. He was 23rd in the spring, so not sure exactly what happened there, whether he'll be able to rebound because he only qualified 31st as well. So lacking speed overall that weekend. But 2 guys certainly from a fantasy perspective you want to be looking at. You probably want to take a look at the practice times today before you get into finalizing your rosters before tomorrow. But two guys certainly worth consideration for fantasy.
Yeah, because at short track, you get the chances of winning this race or being competitive from way back, not very likely. The last 10 winners, 8 have started in the top 5. So
Yep.
you want to be able to. And what is qualifying? Is that tomorrow?
Qualifying is actually
Tonight.
tonight, so they'll be qualifying right before the Xfinity race. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly right. And at Richmond, it pays to start in the top 10 because I think it's more than 75% of the time. It's actually 78% of the time, and we've been racing here for 126 races. 78% of the time, the winners come from the top 10. So if you start outside the top 10, chances are you're not going to get the job done.
And also, Toyota has won 3 straight and 6 of the last 8 races. Last question: what track would you consider the closest to Richmond? Would it be Bristol, Martinsville, Phoenix, Darlington? Which one?
Probably Phoenix, to be honest with you. I think the banking at Richmond is a little bit, certainly it's not like Bristol, different surface than Bristol. It's not as flat as Martinsville. So, taking all factors into consideration, as unique as Phoenix is, I'd probably put Richmond a little bit closer to that category, though it is still a short track. So it's going to have more of those characteristics. But if I were looking at, where somebody was performing well versus how I would expect them to perform at Richmond, it would probably end up being Phoenix.
All right, CJ, what's going on at rotowire.com as far as you're concerned for the race this weekend?
For the race this weekend, obviously we're focusing on those guys that had a drop down, a significant drop down, and those who are obviously up at the top. So we're talking about Martin Truex Jr., we're focusing on Kevin Harvick pulling through, but we're also keeping a close eye on the guys like the Kurt Busch and the Eric Jones, Clint Bowyer, those guys that are on the bubble, because next week, obviously, we're going to a much different race than we are this week, and you don't necessarily want to use that as your fallback to be able to get into the top 12 to advance. So you'd be definitely leaving it up to the chances or up to the racing gods if you left it up to next week.
Just
so
like Jimmy Johnson.
Exactly right. He is the perfect shining example of why you don't want to do that.
Yep.
So we'll see how that happens this week, but we'll be focusing on the top 2 or 3 and then certainly the bottom 4 and those guys that are on the bubble.
Excellent work as always, CJ. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
You got it.